It is time to open up the presents. The NFL Draft for 2022 is complete. 8 presents for the Indianapolis Colts. We're going to unpack them all today on this edition of Kevin's Corner. It is late Monday morning. Myself, Kevin Bowen, Eddie Garrison back. You guys heard Eddie on last week with us. He did some production work for the radio shows with Matt Taylor and Rick Venturi on both Thursday and Friday, right?
Yep.
Thursday and Friday night. So I thought with Chris Presley still in recovery mode from Bachelor Party, as anybody would be on a Monday morning, coming back, thought it'd be great to have Eddie on again to share some draft insight. We'll go pick by pick, all 8 selections, get to, well, what do you have, probably 10 Twitter questions, something around there?
Yeah, got a few.
Yeah, that we'll certainly hit on. But let's just begin with kind of overall thoughts on the Colts draft. I felt like if you didn't make the selection at 42, it was trade back. Chris Ballard, we talked about it entering the draft, the least and the worst amount of draft capital in the history of his tenure. And when you really looked at this year and the needs for me, Eddie, let's put quarterback to the side. Because if you're not going to do quarterback, I totally get it. And obviously, look at the NFL. They send a clear message with their quarterback opinion this year. Then you address the needs, the impactful needs. And I think the Colts did that. We did scenarios last week on the podcast, and I'm pretty sure in the trade back scenario we did, scenario D, it actually ended up being the same pick, Minnesota's pick. I think it was Green Bay, and Minnesota made a trade earlier in the draft. It was pick number 53. And the thinking there is you would get that additional third rounder, and therefore you could cross off in some order wide receiver, left tackle, tight end. And that is indeed what the Colts did. So certainly heavy on athletes, heavy on high-end athletic traits, which is par for the course for Chris Ballard. I even think he took it to another level this year. And what I like probably more than betting on the traits is you've taken a swing at the final needs. Like, I don't look at this roster right now and say, glaring hole. There's still questions. We'll get into some of those. But I think you now have supported Matt Ryan a little bit better. Of course, instant impact. We'll see if that happens. But I thought it was job well done in moving back, getting the additional pick, and trying to take a dart at the board at all those needs.
Totally agree. When I was working with Matt Taylor and Rick Venturi on Friday night when the Colts actually got to pick in that second/third round, Rick Venturi was doing like somersaults. He was doing, I don't know, everything that you can think of in terms of pure excitement because
he wasn't happy about the trade back though, right?
Initially he was not.
Right.
And then once it started kind of unfolding, he was like, oh my goodness, Chris Ballard's a genius. He's like, this is playing out to the way that I thought it would, or he thought he would. But he's like, I just don't like trading back because you're giving away talent. You're missing out on some guys who may have a little bit higher talent. But then in my mind, I went back to his comment that he made pre-draft. He's like, I don't see much of a difference between pick 20 and pick 40.
Right.
So it's like, how much further back of pick 40 can you go to still get that talent that Chris Ballard covets? And I think Alec Pierce was a tremendous first pick for him in that second round. And then once the second round ended and you're going to the third round, Rick Venturi's like, why is Bernard Raymond falling? Why? He's like, I would go tight end here and then see if Raymond's there later. And then he was just jumping for joy after each of those first 3 picks. And I can't say I can echo the same sentiment that Rick Venturi had because we talked about it last week on the pod. And wide receiver and left tackle were probably the big 2 needs. You address both, and you get a couple up-and-coming and promising tight ends to boot.
It's something that I was actually texting. I was looking for that text with Rick Venturi yesterday. He was saying that he read my 11 takeaways article, which, by the way, is up on 1075thefan.com. And we were kind of going back and forth on that. And, yeah, he is, Ryman, which I think that's how it's pronounced, Bernard Ryman. He said he was the only non-first rounder with left tackle skill set. I know he's a big fan on that. And so, yeah, I guess we can just get into the picks if you want to individually. Let's start with Pierce. Eddie, I'm a fan of Notre Dame.
Mm-hmm.
I watched Cincinnati play Indiana this past season, kind of just a casual observer. And I'm watching Alec Pierce flash a little bit in that game. I'm thinking to myself, man, he's going to be one that Notre Dame's going to have their hands full next week. And sure enough, he pretty much ended any sort of playoff hopes for my Irish on that Saturday afternoon in South Bend. It got to the point in that game where Desmond Ridder would drop back to pass, and I would literally, I think I said it out loud, play after play, like anybody but 12. Throw the ball anywhere but 12. Because Alec Pierce made play after play in that game. You see the volleyball background when he plays. I always thought he did such a great job. And again, I ended up watching Cincinnati a good amount this year. Does such a great job of finding the ball, high pointing the ball, and just his timing and his hand-eye coordination on those 50-50 opportunities is such a gift. You can tell he's just a very gifted athlete. And look at his family. Parents are Division I athletes. His brother played at North Carolina recently, basketball. His other brother's going to Princeton next year, and people just rave about how good of a basketball player he was. Glenbard West is the school up in the Chicago suburbs there. So this is an incredibly instinctual, deep ball guy. Sure, it helps when you're 6'3" and 211 and you jump like he jumps and you run like he run like he does as well. That combination of speed, jumping ability, and size is hard to find. I mean, how many times do you see the size but you don't see the speed, or you see the speed and you don't see the size? So I think that's what made him so attractive to the Colts. I love the defensive background in him. I think that helps him.
I do too.
In those opportunities to come down with balls like that. Some safety linebacker background as well.
And I think, Kevin, sorry to interrupt here, but it brings a little bit of a toughness to that wide receiver room a little bit too, and to himself, because you got to be tough in order to play linebacker, because you're down in the trenches and you're hitting people and you're getting hit all the time. So for him to be on the outside, he's going to be able to fight through some contact when he gets the ball into his hands and run after the catch.
Without a doubt, and some Zach Pascal blocking ability. I think they feel like he can bring some of that as well. I distinctly remember the first drive of that Alabama game. Cincinnati got down the field and Pierce won on a one-on-one rep in the red zone, and Ridder just missed him high. I mean, obviously you think Alabama still wins that game, but just how game flow happens and everything. You guys know I'm a huge believer in that. Pierce created an opportunity for Cincinnati to make a big-time early play in that game, and unfortunately his quarterback couldn't deliver that. It's funny, when I watched him in college, and then I've looked up some of kind of his athletic, comparing him athletically, size, frame, speed-wise, to guys of the past, it's not a shocking comparison. I know a lot of Colts fans are going to hate it. He reminds me of Dante Moncrief.
Really?
Just how they're built, how they play a little bit. Obviously, you hope for far better success than Moncrief had. But that's who he does remind me of. He mentioned that his favorite wideouts, I think his favorite wideout he said was Jordy Nelson. The one that he thinks he compares to is A.J. Green. I probably see more Green than Nelson. Nelson to me is a little bit more of a just like consistent, fluid, Cooper Kupp-ish of just a tremendous possession receiver. Whereas I think Alec Pierce needs to work on that aspect to his game, the possession stuff, the route running, kind of the intermediate stuff, but obviously is a much more of a big play guy down the field, which is, I think A.J. Green brings some of that. So if you look up some of the other athletic comps, you'll see Andre Johnson, you'll see Justin Jefferson, you'll see Devontae Parker as well. But his seems to be his greatest kind of room for growth, again, is the intermediate stuff. I know Pro Football Focus had a stat out there of I want to say 2/3 of his yards in college came on vertical routes. You aren't just going to be able to out Randy Moss everybody in the NFL. So that is where he's going to have to develop. Where I think the Colts are intrigued by it is, Eddie, think about his position coach. Arguably Reggie Wayne's greatest strength was as a route runner, precision, kind of being a technician at it. And I think that's where Pierce can grow. And it makes sense. Pierce has not played a ton of wideout. And all three of these first picks that we're going to talk about, they all have these different different position backgrounds in their games as well. So I think there are questions about, can he routinely separate? His like short shuttle stuff and 3-cone stuff wasn't like eye-popping as maybe some of the other testing numbers were. And just becoming kind of a full route tree guy, because again, you aren't going to be able to do that at the NFL level as easily as you were able to do it at the college level. But he was a guy that, again, I was probably a little bit more in the Sky Moore camp. We can talk about that during Twitter questions, but Pierce was right there as well. I mean, certainly he stuck a dagger in my fandom's heart this year, but you had a ton of respect for how he played the game. And I started to look up a little bit more on his background back in the fall, just kind of curiosity about, okay, has he always been a Ritter, target, because Ritter had been a starter there for so many years and everything. And, I've got some friends from Glenbard West, and you kind of talk to them, and they're like, oh, yeah, this is the Pierce family that Justin Pierce is his brother, who transferred to North Carolina after playing at William & Mary. And I'm like, yeah, I definitely remember that, dude. I was hoping Notre Dame basketball would get his brother there. But medical engineering degree, so his brother going to Princeton. I would say academics are not too far behind there. In their family, I believe the mom went to Northwestern. I think mom and dad, maybe
they both did.
Went to Northwestern. And you love the Luke Fickell quote of, he's got such a competitive streak that I tried to move him to linebacker when he was a freshman. That's what you like. Think about wideout. It's diva. It's pretty boy for a lot of people. And I feel like in Michael Pittman and Alec Pierce, they don't have that. Pierce will give you, he'll knock on the door and he'll be like, oh wow, that looks like the good old boy from down the street. But I do think he plays the game with some physicality as well. So you're gonna have to polish. You're gonna have to fine tune some things. My expectations for him as a rookie, he's gonna get a lot of opportunities, but again, tempering those is probably fair. I know I mentioned the stat on last week, but I think it's worth mentioning. Again, Alec Pierce is now the 6th wideout the Colts have had taken in round 1 or 2 since 2000. Those other 5 wideouts averaged 28 catches for 355 yards. So I know a lot of people just want to pencil him in for 80 for 800 or something like that. It's like, let's just pump the brakes a little bit there. There is some rawness to his game, which is, I think, you could say that about a lot of these draft prospects, but this is how Ballard operates. Ballard is a huge believer in high-end character, high-end traits. Here you go, coaching staff. Here's the clay. That's basically what he says with a lot of this. You're not going to find All-American accolades on many of these draft picks. You're not going to find, Pierce wasn't a 1,000-yard guy. You aren't going to find a lot of these top-flight 3-year starters at their position in college. But what the Colts are banking on is that those traits and the development creates a higher floor, and then the higher character brings them to that ceiling that they also possess there. So any thoughts from you on Pierce?
I think the difference in some of those comparisons to the numbers that you just gave out is that Pierce has an opportunity right away to step into a role, and I don't know how many of those previous guys that were selected within the first 2 rounds for the Colts have had that chance
good point.
To step in and be a starter on the opposite side of Michael Pittman, and he'll get a lot of one-on-one certainly with Jonathan Taylor bringing down so many people into the box, and you'll see a lot more one-on-one for him. Maybe they shift coverage a little more over to Michael Pittman Jr. and force Pierce, a rookie wide receiver, to beat them. So there's going to be some opportunities for success for Pierce. And I know one thing that Rick Venturi mentioned right after the Colts picked Pierce was that you don't see much tape on him, like you said, in the medium to the short area. And that's just because that was the way the offense was designed for Cincinnati, is that they didn't need him to do that. So they just said, hey, we're going to use you in the vertical passing game a little bit more than you will be underneath in the medium. And from what I gather from Rick's comments is that when the Colts went over there to look at
the private workout,
Desmond Ridder, quote unquote, they sent him Pierce through some medium short route running, and they really liked what they saw. So I think there's something there. And plus, it seemed to me, I don't know about you, KB, Pierce in the last couple days leading up to the draft, his name had started picking up a little bit more and more, and that he started to rise up the draft boards a little bit.
Yeah, it felt like there was some momentum there for him. And when you saw the 6 wideouts go, they're by pick 18, you're kind of thinking to yourself, wow, okay, when is Moore? When is Pickens? When is Watson? When is Pierce going to go? And to your point about that private workout, Reggie Wayne, again, his background would cater to a development here in this area. I think ultimately it was Pierce's frame that probably separated him from a guy like Sky Moore. And again, we'll touch more on that in Twitter questions. Not only did they draft Alec Pierce, they signed Michael Young, former Notre Dame wideout, transferred to Cincinnati. He was there in the draft or in that private workout at Cincinnati a couple weeks back. Okay, you want to move on to Jelani Woods?
Yes, sir.
All right, dual threat quarterback coming out. Again, that's kind of the intrigue with him. It's, I think anytime you get an ex-quarterback, you're always thinking to yourself, man, that guy's probably got a pretty unique mind. That would be the first thing. You think about footwork for a quarterback, and you think about footwork for a tight end. That's something that I think is attractive to the Colts. But you watch that With the Next Pick series the Colts do?
I do.
Okay, so I forget one of their scouts early in that, I guess it would have been episode 1 or 2, had a clip in there of saying something to the effect of, you don't see a player that big look that good or play that good, something like that. That was Jelani Woods in that clip. 6'7", 260, runs 4.6. If you look at those testing metric sites or whatever, he's the most athletic tight end ever to be drafted or something along those lines. He mentioned how last year he played through a bit of an ankle injury, and the Colts talked about when he dropped a little bit of weight after the season, they felt like that even improved his running ability. Chris Ballard was pretty adamant on Friday night of this guy can run. At times I feel like Mo Alley Cox looks a hair clunky when he runs. Yeah. And again, I'm probably nitpicking. I'm probably being a hair overly critical, but, and I get it. You're 6'7", 260. I'm not, you aren't supposed to look like Usain Bolt out there, but I think they feel like there's a little bit more fluidity to Woods and how he runs. Woods told a great story about how he made the switch to tight end. Basically, it's Bedlam week, Oklahoma State, Oklahoma, and they're like, all right, how do we mimic Mark Andrews, Oklahoma State staff? They put Jelani Woods at tight end, and Colts fans, they don't need any reminder of what Mark Andrews can look like on a football field. And Woods is like, yeah, I just tore up our starting defense during the scout team, and the staff was like, all right, we need to keep you at tight end. Ultimately transfers to Virginia for his final season. I think the big thing with Woods is this. Can you be crisp and just so pinpoint with the short route running? Kind of similar to Pierce, I guess. But at tight end, it's even more critical.
Yeah.
At 6'7", 260, you naturally have a catch radius. Obviously. Yeah. I mean, it is eye-popping, and Matt Ryan's going to love that. But if you hesitate out of a break, if you're a little choppy, on the shorter routes, guys are going to grab you, and that's going to kind of eat you up. I thought that's what made Jack Doyle so effective, was just precision, knowing when to break, those sorts of things, of where Doyle didn't naturally create tons of separation with his speed and quickness, but just his precision allowed him to do that. So I think that's where Woods, needs to take that stride. Some drops, but nothing too crazy there. So we'll obviously keep an eye on that. But what I liked about this pick too, Eddie, is I wanted more of the Jack Doyle type of versatility. Yeah. And I think Woods can give you that. His frame as a blocker, that should help, and then his catching ability. The other thing to note is he participated in the East-West Shrine Bowl this past year. That would be Marcus Brady as, I think, the head coach of his team, offensive coordinator for the Colts. And Clayton Adams, the tight ends coach here in Indy, was also on that staff. So you got to see him in person and see the coachability. Because, again, similar to Pierce, Jelani Woods, you're not going to see 3 years of doing it at the college level. Part of that is a position switch, certainly. So there needs to be development there. But this is the most moldable piece of clay ever at tight end. Did I say that right?
I think so.
Moldalist. Gosh, that sounds bad now that I say it out loud. The most moldable piece of clay is what we're going with Jelani Woods there at pick 73.
I see he has like 34.5-inch arms. I was looking up real quick.
God, those are longer arms than
I was about
Ryman.
I was about to look at the same thing. 32 7/8.
Yeah. I mean, that's a big difference.
Yeah, those are some long arms.
And, Woods has got the basketball background, which shouldn't shock anybody there. So does Alec Ogletree. I knew I'd do that at some point. Drew Ogletree, who they drafted in round 6. Anything else on Woods before we move on to Mr. Ryman?
I think the one thing I was watching some highlights of him after the Colts drafted him on Saturday, I think, either Saturday or Sunday. I can't remember which day. And you can see that he's not afraid to run across the middle of the field, take a hit, and just plow through a guy either.
And think about what we've seen from Mo Alley Cox. I mean, you got to be a pretty willing tackler.
Yeah.
And you can injure some dudes, and you can make some stuff happen in the open field. I feel like one of the Colts plays that they've gone to a little bit here in recent years is they just love getting Mo the ball on a screen.
Yeah.
And just say, all right.
Go tackle him.
And think about screens, man. How many times is like a shoestring tackle or just, you get half of me on a block, but my other shoulder gets in there and is able to kind of chop you down ankle, knee-wise. Well, it's 6'7", 260. Can you do that? Can you get the proper hit to knock a guy down? I think that is all in there. So
final quick thing here. I think he's an actual clone of Mo Alley Cox for the purpose of, okay, we know the injury history with Mo Alley Cox. Now let's draft a guy that has a similar build that, can fill right in if Mo goes down and has a similar skill set to Mo. And I think Jelani Woods fits that.
No, I think that's a good point as well. We'll get into rookie playing time probably more on next week's podcast. But certainly, that Frank Reich loves to rotate tight ends, so Jelani Woods, I think, will play from day one.
All right, Bernard Ryman.
Yes.
3rd round, 77th overall.
The big fella from Austria moved over here. He seems like such a kind of reminds me of Bjorn Werner from a Mindset Boy. The fact that I've dropped Bjorn Werner and Dante Moncrief here. He reminds me of Bjorn. I remember when Bjorn was drafted, there's just such like a happy-go-lucky sense. Unfair of me to stereotype all European NFL players in the same way, but I think there's such an appreciation for this dude did not play football until he was 14 years old, and now he's in the NFL.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, how would you not be happy with that? So he came over here at the age of 17, has a soccer background. He was a wide receiver for his club team. So again, you talk about kind of early footwork. That's where it comes from. He was a tight end initially at Central Michigan, and only has 18 starts at Central at left tackle. He kind of looks like one of the characters from Street Fighter. Street Fighter too old for you? Or are you?
I'm familiar with it, but I've never seen it in full.
He kind of reminds me of one of those characters there. His host father at Central Michigan, his host father in Michigan played offensive tackle, ironically enough, at Central Michigan. So there was some football background there when he came over to the States. Something that, I don't know if he'd call it a blessing, but when he made the switch from tight end to tackle, Eddie, he had only had 2 practices at offensive tackle before COVID.
Oh.
And he put on 60 pounds. Think about how much, I can speak from experience. Your boy put on some weight during COVID. Certainly. And old Bernard here put on 60 pounds. I'd say a little bit better weight than Kevin did, and a little bit more of proper goals to obtain than my goals were just let's survive sanity here. But it was just wild to hear him say that, his parents flew in for the draft. That's the first time they had seen him since 2019. Oh,
wow. So they hadn't even seen him since he had put on all that weight then.
So they saw him 60 pounds ago and everything. So the 18 starts at left tackle, I believe only allowed 1 sack, which certainly stands out. Again, you can look at that kind of in a couple of ways. Certainly, he's still very raw, and there's room to grow, and there's plenty of development. And then also 18 starts, is that like enough, to get the true evaluation? Because I'm thinking to myself, why did he fall to round 3? Because we saw some mocks that had him late 1, early 2. I think it was the short arms.
It could be.
You feel like, this sounds bad, but you see teams that are like, oh, dinosaur, T-Rex arms. Like Braden Smith has proven to be the exception to the rule in that at right tackle. Can now your left tackle be that in Bernhard Raimann? Ballard is adamant he has left tackle talent. I guess him and Matt Pryor compete for the left tackle job. If Raimann wins that, could Pryor go to right guard where he has experience and Danny Pinter's your 6th offensive lineman? Is Danny Pinter your right guard, and it's either Raimann or Pryor as a 6th offensive lineman? Like, all these things are kind of popping into my head about what you do with him. Some have asked, could he play guard? I don't know if he's got the strength, right away to play guard. That's the other thing. He put on 60 pounds. Do you want to adjust any of his weight? Is there anything now that you want to do with that? You could probably ask Joe Wrights, who did something similar, gained 60, 70 pounds, and you're up at 2, 3 a.m. at night drinking protein shakes. Like, now that you've got the weight, do you want to kind of readjust that weight, in terms of lower body, upper body, things like that? But yeah, Raimann seems like just a good dude. I think with him so young in his football career, you've got a very willing learner. You've got a guy that won't get too beat up if he makes a mistake, things like that, which are all, I think, attributes that you want in a player. And you guys know, I've talked about it for years. I think it's been such a mistake over the years the Colts have not drafted a tackle. So part of me was like, about damn time. And then part of me thought, too, wow, this is a guy that some people thought would go a lot earlier. Now, the rest of the NFL decided not to pick him for an entire round. I thought at any point around 2 he could go. And you didn't see him. Hell, what did he go? The middle of round 3? So there is some concern there that the NFL decided to kind of sit back and let him drop and drop. Is that all the arm length? We'll see. But again, Bernhard Raimann should come in here and compete. And if nothing else, he's probably your 6th offensive lineman here as a rookie.
I'd like to point out a couple of things. So, yes, he had only allowed 1 sack and 16 total pressures and 690 collegiate pass blocking attempts at left tackle. That's according to Pro Football Focus. And then when you look at Braden Smith, I was comparing the two because, like you said, the thing about Braden Smith was his short arms. Braden Smith's arms were 32 1/4, and Bernhard Raimann's are 32 7/8. So he's got a little bit of longer arms.
Okay.
And then Braden Smith is 6'6 1/4, and then Raimann 6'6 1/8. They're relatively similar build, height, weight, combine results, everything.
I would say the one difference to me, and I'm speaking a little bit out of turn here, but Braden Smith, he's got polar bear strength. He is just a bulldozer. And I don't know if weight, I don't know if, bench press can indicate that, but I would think that would be the one question I would have. Because remember, Braden Smith was drafted to be a guard. Raimann wasn't really drafted to be a guard. That's not the thinking there. So I just think a little bit different with their athleticism. I'd probably say this: Raimann is more of the, dancing bear on your feet type of athlete, whereas, Braden Smith is probably more of just a polar bear, just a run dozer sort of.
So if you want to go by combine results, Raimann did 30 reps at 225, and Braden Smith did 35 at 225.
Yeah, so I guess a little bit more strength there, based off that. These 3 needs, man. Again, scenario D that we had last week. You trade back, you address all 3 of them. I think I talked about on last week's podcast, there were goals for me coming into the draft. Quarterback is always a goal. It has to be a goal until you find the answer.
Right.
The other 3 on that list, all right, I put that to the side, and I said, all right, 4 intermediate goals. Of the 4 immediate goals, 3 of them right here. Take a dart with a big play wide out, find a versatile tight end, and can you find the future at left tackle? We'll see if you're able to check all of them, but you've attempted to address the goals. Like, Kevin exiting quarantine. He would like to work out more. I've at least worked out once. We'll see if it continues.
Yeah.
But I just think it's really, really important to spend quality draft capital on, in particular, wide receiver and left tackle. I mean, we know how big those needs are.
Yeah.
And the Colts have not done that, especially at tackle, I should say. Anything else on Ryman, or should we move on to, in my opinion, the most interesting move of the draft?
Let's move on to Nick Cross.
How about this? I mean, this is the one where I'm sitting there. You and I are talking a little bit, and I'm thinking to myself, the Colts are trading back up?
Yeah.
I'm like, what in the this Chris Bauer doesn't do that. And this isn't a trade up of 5 spots, 10 spots.
Uh-huh.
This is a give up a 3rd round pick next year. Let's wait on the value. I think we had a Twitter question about that.
Yes,
so
yes.
Let's hold off on that. Let's just talk about Cross. It's like the Colts are trading up, and I'm thinking to myself before the name even pops up, this will be Chris Ballard's favorite draft pick.
Yeah.
I mean, it is a gargantuan move for Ballard to trade up, give a future 3rd round pick.
Especially in the 3rd round. He loves.
And the Colts thinking with Nick Cross is this. He's 20 years old. The Colts drafted a lot of older dudes, by the way. I mean, Ryman will be 25. That's probably another reason why Ryman dropped. I probably should have mentioned that. Some of the day 3 picks, if I'm not mistaken, are 24, 25, which with the extra COVID year, you're going to have older guys in this class. Nick Cross is not old. He is not even 21 years old, which, again, the NFL, you got to be in college for 3 years. So that is young. Honestly, who was a young prospect and never worked out, but Dante Moncrief, second Moncrief mentioned.
You better stop. You're going to get some hate.
Of the draft here. I'm just trying to get the SEC listeners to get back on the podcast, man. Not enough SEC picks out of the Colts for my liking here, because you always get a flocking of numbers. And thank you to everybody out there that clicked on the website throughout the weekend. Our clicks are really strong, so I appreciate that. So they thought with Nick Cross, if he would have stayed another year at Maryland, he would have been a 2nd round pick. So that's why they felt like he was worth trading to the back of the 3rd round to get. Tall, big, and can run. 6'1", 212, 213, whatever his height or weight is. And I believe the fastest 40 of any safety at the combine. 4.34, I want to say. He's a DeMatha product, which, again, for someone that is unhealthily obsessed with Notre Dame basketball, a lot of DeMatha products in the day. Mike Bray hails from DeMatha, known much more, I think, as a basketball school. He was a really highly recruited kid, though, that was a Florida State commit, I believe, at one point, and then ended up at Maryland.
I'm sorry to him for ending up at Maryland.
Well, yeah, you might say sorry for committing to Florida State with how they've been in past years. I'll be curious to see what happens to him here in 2022. Does he get on the field early? I mean, on paper, not a lot of open playing time there. A little bit of Gus Bradley influence. And Eddie, if guys like Kari Willis and Julian Blackmon saw the pick of Bernard Ryman and thought, all right, Colts aren't drafting a safety till day 3. All good here. Yeah. Oh, boy. And Willis is probably the one that comes to mind first, because
we've got a Twitter question about that, so let's not try to get into that too deep.
Let's hold off on that. But, I thought there could be a linebacker type pick for Bobby Okereke.
Yeah.
It looks like it's more of a safety. So we will hold off on that. But just quickly on Cross for 2022, I am interested to see, is this a kind of a red shirt for him? Not that he's hurt or he didn't play at Maryland. I'm pretty sure he's a 3-year starter at Maryland. But again, when Julian Blackmon's healthy, you've got 3 safeties: Blackmon, Kari Willis, and Rodney McLeod. 3 safeties is enough to get by. Certainly Cross will help you out.
Of course, you always have to have the special team. Let's say the special teams factor there.
Right, and you would think, given his size and his speed, he would definitely be able to help you out there. So anything else on Cross?
I don't think so. I mean, you pretty much got everything there. I'm pretty intrigued by him, too, as well. Maybe he's a guy, you bring in to learn behind the veteran and Rodney McLeod for a year, and then let him loose year 2 if you have to. But It seems like a pretty exciting pick for Chris Ballard.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And the actions speak louder than words. So no quote from Chris Ballard will do it justice on Nick Cross, and he speaks very highly of him, but it's the actions. When you give up a third-round pick when you don't have the quarterback answer, it's interesting to me.
Very much so. All right, Eric Johnson, round 5.
Okay, moving to Saturday. You know his coach at Missouri State?
I do?
Do you? Former NFL head coach.
I do not.
The one and only Bobby Petrino.
Oh.
Yeah. Old Bobby P. Boy, some stories about Bobby. 6'4", 299. Dane Brugler, you guys heard him on this podcast a few weeks ago, had him graded as the highest non-combine guy of anybody in the draft. Now, a lot of prospects get invited to the combine, but still, a really strong pro day. You know, you look at him and like, boy, he really carries his weight very well, which I've always thought that about Grover Stewart. I'm like, Grover Stewart's one of the best looking defensive tackles in the NFL. And I love when Grover throws the chicken in the sink and starts whipping up a meal. Last night grilled some chicken, and I thought, should I just throw it in the sink like
grill some chicken?
Big old Grove. My wife, that was probably her favorite scene, honestly, of Hard Knocks. The biggest thing that stands out to me about Eric Johnson, 5-year starter in college with the COVID year, never missed a game. You know, you play interior defensive line, you don't miss one game. I mean, that's some durability. And Grover, I feel like, is like that. Grover just doesn't miss time. He's always practicing. He's always playing. You know, Johnson's numbers aren't going to wow you. He was a late call up to the Senior Bowl, played in one of the other, maybe the East-West Shrine game, and then got called up to the Senior Bowl. So felt like they, held his own against better competition. And we've touched on this a little bit, and we'll do it again with Curtis Brooks here in just a second. Eddie, I've tried to stress the change from Matt Eberflus to Gus Bradley. I asked Frank Reich a couple weeks ago, I was like, what's the percentage of change? Frank Reich said a 30% change. 30% is a big number.
It is.
That is a big number. So what we're getting at with that is change in philosophy, change in scheme,
vocabulary,
change in vocab, certainly, change in the type of players you want, i.e. Nick Cross. Again, Kari Willis and Julian Blackmon, they're not Gus Bradley picks.
Right.
So with Johnson and Curtis Brooks especially, the defensive line approach now is much different. It is no longer read and react. It's no longer absorb blockers and let the guys behind us, run free. Mm-hmm. Now it's let's get right up the field, create chaos in the backfield as best as possible, and then, obviously you want your linebackers to go ahead and clean that up. Basically what they're looking for is just a quick first step. Get upfield, don't need to be wide-bodied, things like that. He mentioned his, transitioning from like rundowns to pass downs, something he needs to improve on. He struck me as a very coachable guy. Seemed like a really good dude.
Guy Dane Brugler summed up Johnson as saying, quote, he has flashes of phone booth explosiveness, functional hand use, and play range. He should appeal to multiple schemes and is ideally suited as a 5 technique or quick penetrating 3 technique.
There you go. So, yeah, I look at this as kind of Antoine Woods and especially Taylor Stallworth are gone. Need some backup D-tackle reps, and defensive line depth was a need entering the draft. So, here you go.
So, Nick Cross was your favorite. I think Andrew Ogletree, the next pick, 6th round, is a guy that really...
Is this your favorite?
This might be one of my favorites. I went to UND D2 school. He went to Findlay, a D2 school, was wide receiver.
Is that your guys' conference?
No. I can't remember what Findlay is, but I know UND could have played them in both football and basketball in the postseason, but their paths never crossed. But I think this is a sneaky good pick. 6'5", 260. I think last year, correct me if I'm wrong, was like his first year at tight end after he played at D2 at wide receiver. He bets on himself, bulks up, transfers to D1 in Youngstown State over in Ohio. And I think there's you see a 4.7 40 for a tight end, you're like, oh, that dude can move.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So you can certainly see the wide receiver traits in him. And boy, if you think about him, Mo Alley Cox and Jelani Woods, and you still have Kylan Granson, you've got a pretty young group with those three, and then Mo Alley Cox.
Yeah,
all of those guys, can be game difference makers on Sundays.
They go over to Gainbridge Fieldhouse and run fives with the Pacers. Honestly, you laid it out well right there, Eddie. Turns 24 in July, so again a little bit on the older end. Ballard really gushed about him. Again, a piece of clay. I mean, so many things similar, honestly, to Jelani Woods in size and speed. My only issue is just like, this dude, he's going to have a fight to make the football team. And I get it. It's round 6 of day 3. Whoop-de-doo. At this point, you're just drafting dudes that you feel like you've identified, you think are talented, and you think a lot less about positions. I'd probably side a little bit more with positions. Ogletree's a guy that Mo Alley Cox is making the team. Kylan Granson, I know some people are like, Kylan Granson, this is a wake-up call to him. I'm like, Kylan Granson is such a different body type than Ogletree and Jelani Woods. We'll get more into this on next week's podcast, but like, Kylan Granson, you want to detach as a little, 6'2", 230-pound, sort of kind of split out tight end. Yeah, Trey Burton, exactly. So I don't know how much it really impacts you there. I just say fight to make the roster in that you've got a guy that is going to be your 4th tight end, which I think a lot of people look at that as kind of a luxury item on teams. If you keep a 4th tight end, that means you don't keep a 4th running back. If you keep a 4th tight end, maybe you don't keep a 6th wideout. Things like that is some of the roster number crunching. So maybe I'm looking way too down the road. But this is a pick that I would like to have seen a corner a little bit earlier than where they took one. I don't even know if the guy they took at corner is actually a corner. But just something along those lines. Maybe another wideout. I frankly think another wideout would have a better chance to make the team as well.
And then you heard him say after he got selected by the Colts in his interview that the Colts had been watching him and monitoring him for 3 years.
Yeah,
So this is a guy that they have been hounding and watching for years, and they must obviously see something in him that most, if not all other teams don't see.
Yeah, that was interesting. When he mentioned that, basically said Chad Henry, the Midwest area scout, was like, "Hey, when you transfer from Findlay to Youngstown State, you need to become a tight end." If I'm not mistaken, the last time he caught a touchdown was 2018. It's kind of wild to see that for a tight end. Didn't catch any touchdowns at Youngstown State. So look, there's a lot of development here needed. He says he's more comfortable as a wideout, right, or as a receiver than as a blocker. And you just hope a guy like Ogletree will get the opportunity. We'll get more into the undrafted free agents next week, but I saw the Colts signed Jack Cohn out of Notre Dame as their 4th QB. And I'm like, oh wow, Cohn is a really nice 4th QB. I've kind of come around on how I think the back end of the quarterback depth chart should be in the preseason. I used to think your 4th QB should just be some crazy tradey project that you just try to develop. But then I'm thinking to myself, as much as that makes sense, when your 4th-string quarterback can't throw the football, how the hell do you evaluate anybody on your 3rd string or 4th string?
Yeah.
Jack Cohn is a very accurate dude, very smart dude. He's going to at least give you the chance to evaluate a Drew Ogletree.
Yeah.
So I think that's a nice benefit that you have.
I know you mentioned Ogletree didn't have a single touchdown reception, so I just went and checked out on Youngstown State. They only had 3 receivers that registered a touchdown reception. One of them had 8 of the 11. So obviously they didn't score much offensively, and if they did, they didn't look to him. They looked at Bryce Oliver more than anybody else.
Yeah, not a high-powered attack there at Youngstown State. So, all right, we got 2 more to go. Who's up next? Is it Curtis Brooks?
Yes, it is.
Probably my favorite day 3 pick. You got 7.5 sacks as a defensive tackle. That stands out. You do that on one of the best defenses in college football, arguably the best. That really stands out to me. Love the swagger I felt from him just in a 10, 15-minute Zoom. and this goes back to the comments we made about Eric Johnson, Eddie. Why is a 287-pound defensive tackle sitting there in the 6th round? Well, because 287 pounds, and a lot of teams don't run the scheme that the Colts do. The Colts want to get upfield, and it's not about holding the point of attack. Whereas at 287, he's going to struggle in that area. It's about stepping up, getting vertical, those things, and I think that's where he excels. He talked about how he kind of worked on his body a whole lot coming into his senior year. I think around that program in Cincinnati, they probably realized, all right, we flirted with something here facing Georgia in the Sugar Bowl. Now it's, can you get to that next level? And they did that, obviously. Older prospect, that's probably why he fell as well. But 7.5 sacks. I mean, Taylor Stallworth had several nice pressures, several important hurries last year as a rotational defensive tackle. If healthy, guys like Brooks and Johnson, they're going to probably struggle to find minutes because you can use a Dayo Adengbo, you can use a Tyquan Lewis in there. But we know how Chris Ballard operates. Wants a whole lot of 8-9 defensive linemen. And while Curtis Brooks wasn't a fit for a lot of NFL teams, he was a fit for the Colts. So I like this pick. I'm excited to see him as an interior rusher.
I'm going to get super analytical here for you. This is all coming from PFF. Pass rush win rate, 19.3%.
Eye-popping, right?
Run defense stop rate, 13.1%.
And this is Brooks. Right?
Yes. Pass rush grade, 90.4. True pass set grade, 92.3. True pass set win rate, 37%. And then run defense grade, 69.9. Everything that I gave you leading up to that last one in run defense grade, best in the class.
Yeah.
How does a guy like that fall that far, even with the size factor?
It's one of those things, Eddie. I think he's kind of the David Bell of a defensive tackle. And I know that's not apples to apples, but I said this throughout the draft process. I don't think David Bell is very high on the Colts board. I mean, look at how the Colts drafted.
Yeah.
Look where David Bell measures out athletically. Now, you get to pick 200, and you're more willing to make adjustments, and I think there's a direct scheme fit here that was not a direct scheme fit to a whole lot of other teams as well. So I think those are some of the reasons. We're hoping to have Luke Fickell on our morning show tomorrow, so hopefully to get some more on Curtis Brooks from the Cincinnati's head coach there. But, yeah, this is a guy that, again, I think brings a little bit of swagger. And interior defensive linemen, I don't know, they're always just – a lot of them are just funny dudes to me. Zach Kerr, Grover, all that stuff. I feel like Curtis Brooks has got a little bit of that to him as well.
The final pick of the 2022 NFL Draft for the Colts, 7th round, 239th overall, Yale cornerback, Rodney Thomas II.
The first Bulldog from Yale to be drafted since 2018. Kind of a wild defensive background. Played some linebacker, played some safety. The Colts think he's a cornerback. Like, you don't usually see linebacker and cornerback in a background of a player. Marvell Tell type of pick is kind of how I view it. He's from Yale, so he's a smart dude, and if he can play multiple positions, that helps you on game day. And now that's, of course, if he makes a team. If you're Rodney Thomas, you got to be doing backflips, man. Like, the Colts did not draft a corner, which I thought was a position that should have been drafted earlier. That was my only kind of one position gripe about this draft. But now you walk into for a lot of guys, it's like they'd rather go undrafted than be drafted. That's how a lot of people think. Well, he walks into a situation that's pretty darn good for him in terms of playing time and the possibility to make the team. Sure, Kenny Moore, Stephon Gilmore, yes, but Brandon Faison on a 1-year deal. Isaiah Rodgers, you're thinking and expecting, and I totally get it, that he will make a jump, but that's not a slam dunk either. And again, I thought about Gus Bradley. Do you want to play press a little bit more? That's where I think a guy like Rodney Thomas has some of that background as well. So, yeah.
I know we went long there with all those picks, but you want to get into Twitter questions now?
Yeah, let me just throw in a couple quick things if you don't mind, Eddie. Feel free to jump in. Love what the New York Jets did with their draft.
Yeah.
The Sauce Gardner, Garrett Wilson, Breece Hall,
Jermaine Johnson,
and then one of my guys that I like, Jeremy Ruckert, the tight end at Ohio State as well. We've talked so much about the AFC this year. Two teams we haven't talked about, but you see quarterbacks make a jump like this a lot. What happens if Trevor Lawrence makes a big jump? What happens if Zach Wilson makes a big jump? I mean, that's 1 and 2 overall from last year. All of a sudden, you got to talk about that team, in the mix. Now, again, they got to make big jumps. We saw with Joe Burrow, though.
Yeah.
Do we see it from anybody else this year? The other thing that I wanted to mention is this. I think the biggest win of the draft for the Colts came on Thursday night.
I was about to hit on that too.
The biggest win for the Colts came with A.J. Brown being traded out of the division. I tweeted it Thursday, and for those that believe in prayer, add the AFC South to your prayer list nightly. God bless this division. God bless it, folks. I kind of have called the Colts like the Oklahoma State of the Big 12. The Colts don't play in the SEC. They don't play in the Big 10. Hell, the ACC added Notre Dame for a year, and they made the playoff. So, the ACC is even at a higher level. Like, the Big 12 is just like Oklahoma's Tennessee. They're going to make the playoff, but they're going to lose. And then Oklahoma State is the bridesmaid, and the Colts oftentimes have kind of been the bridesmaid in this division. I think A.J. Brown's a massive loss. Tennessee 1-3 in the 4 games. They didn't have him last year. The only win was Jacksonville. I just don't look at Ryan Tannehill. I think Ryan Tannehill often gets a bad rap, but at the same time, Eddie, I don't view him as a guy that just all of a sudden makes others play better around him. I agree. To that level. I think Brown is such a big loss, and I'm not sure the last time I felt, I guess this is a combination. I don't know the last time I felt this confident about the Colts plus this least confident in the AFC South. Does that make sense?
Yes.
There's confidence with the Colts, but there's probably more confidence in those other 3 teams. Jacksonville and Houston got a long ways to go, and Tennessee has gotten worse. So we'll see if Treylon Burks can make an immediate impact, and Robert Woods coming off the ACL and all of that. But gosh, man, that is the win of the draft for the Indianapolis Colts.
I thought, even though they traded away Hollywood Brown, I thought Baltimore had a really solid draft too.
I love me some Kyle Hamilton.
Yeah, they got Kyle Hamilton, Tyler Linderbaum, and then they grabbed David Ojabo. And then I think they even got a couple tight ends. I think they drafted Isaiah Likely and then Jake Ferguson. I could be wrong on Ferguson, but they added some guys.
Yeah.
They didn't pick up guys that had that were raw or whatever. They picked up guys that had some actual success in college that kind of just fell beyond on the draft board because of the way the draft played out. I thought Baltimore had a solid draft, and I know Lamar Jackson isn't going to be happy with losing Hollywood Brown, but they got tougher.
Yeah, and again, Baltimore, it's just similar to Pittsburgh, man. They just show up at the end of the year. They just, oh, wow, there they are. I like the Jets. I mean, I'm selfish here, but I like Sky Moore to Kansas City, and I like in general.
I'm not. I'm scared of that one.
what Kansas City did. Dane Brugler, he didn't have the Colts ranked too high, I think, on his I'm looking up right now. Where do you have him? 20-ish? 21st? Yeah, 20th on his drafts. I guess all in all, this is kind of my big takeaway before we move on to Twitter questions. I know today's going to be a little bit of a longer pod, but that's necessary with breaking down each of these draft picks. All in on traits, all in on character, and now it's pressure on your coaching staff. Ballard said, we found the unteachable stuff. We think there's willingness to learn and grow. Now your coaching staff has got to deliver on that. I mean, you look at these first 3 picks, their college resumes are not very, very decorated in terms of multiple all-conference years, multiple all-American years, 1,000-yard season, whatever you want to call it. Alec Pierce, Jelani Woods have really only done it for a year. Bernard Ryman, 2-year tackle. Now, position switches and a transfer for Woods, there's reasons behind that. But this is something that Ballard is looking at the draft process and he says, yes, scouting is one, but now your coaches have got to do it as well. So yeah, let's get into Twitter questions.
Alrighty. First Twitter question comes from Wake Spike. Hey guys, hope the post-draft media hangover has worn off. Love the content you put up during it. While watching the draft, they commented on how Baltimore wasn't picking the flashiest players, but just reliable guys. Do you think that the Colts sometimes go a bit overboard with measurables and should take some more average but reliable picks?
Yeah, Wake Spike, I totally get it. I think finding the balance is key. Again, I think David Bell can be an outlier. Do you want to always try and believe that you're finding the David Bell outlier? Probably not. The NFL, and Ballard is all in on this, they really have turned it into a science. These body types hit at a higher rate. These measurable packages have a higher floor, whatever you want to call it. This height, this weight, this 40 time, this 3-cone, that guy hits 78.9% of the time.
Yep.
Whereas this measurable and that weight, that hits 24.6% of the time. Okay, you still can find good players and bad apples in each of those sort of scenarios. So, look, I have no doubt the Colts draft class would win a decathlon right now. No doubt. And there is football stuff that you like. Pierce did it against some big-time competition. Jelani Woods had a really nice touchdown number in his first year as being a tight end at a major conference. Again, Ryman, you read off what he did from a pressure and sack standpoint. And they, if I'm not mistaken, I think they faced LSU and Missouri. So, it's not like they just played a bunch of MAC schools the entire time. If I probably a little bit more on the college production that I would side with. Again, Wake Spike, I do think they cross off some guys off the board a little bit more than I would. But I understand the thought process in banking on athletes and wanting to go there. You can find examples of good and bad.
Yeah.
Darius Leonard, high-end athlete, worked out. TJ Green, royally didn't. It's like, you can find those comps. I was just scrolling the other day, through.
Gosh, TJ Green in there now too?
Well,
you got Dante.
I apologize. I was scrolling through, RAS, that big acronym of relative athletic score or whatever it's called, that has really kind of taken hold of the NFL draft process here over the past few years. I just got stuck on safeties for a reason. I think I was looking up Nick Cross, and I started scrolling through the safeties that had the top RAS score over the last, I think it goes back to 2000, if I'm not mistaken.
I haven't checked it out, so I'll have to check it out.
And I just got through the first 15 or 20 safeties, and Eddie, I don't know if I found more than 2 guys that were of note. So again, these high-end athletes, it doesn't mean that you're automatically going to hit.
Right.
There's got to be development. There's got to be scheme fit. This is part of the process, but there are other parts that I think we forget about with this draft. So many times, and I've had conversations with these guys about it, whereas Chuck Pagano would say that Ryan Grigson didn't draft the right guys, and Ryan Grigson would say Chuck Pagano didn't develop his guys. We forget that there is this marriage that has to coexist between your scouting department and your coaching staff. Of you see guys that never have a chance to work out because they're just not a good player, or maybe they have a chance but you don't know because their coaching staff didn't develop, or you see them go elsewhere and then they really flash because their coaching staff did develop them. So again, it is a complicated process. That's
kind of like the drum I've been beating, especially the last year. That's okay, you've been drafting all these edge rushers, not to get on too far of a tangent here, but none of them have developed or panned out. I was like, okay. People are like, all right, let's blame Chris Ballard. I was like, well, hold on here. Chris Ballard drafts them. There has to be some accountability, like you said, on the coaching staff to develop these guys.
Yeah. Again, it is a two-way street. Now, someone would say, well, the coaching staff is under Ballard as general manager. He's the one that's hired this coaching staff, which is totally fine. And obviously he played a huge role in the Matt Eberflus hiring. back, whatever that was, 2018 and everything. So, again, this is probably the big picture item on this Colts draft. They've always gone athlete, but this is the most high-end athlete they have gone.
Next question or questions come from Mike. First one, did you guys watch the phone call from Ballard to Alec Pierce?
I did. Yeah, I did. Yep.
Okay, maybe I'm reading into this way too much, but during Alec Pierce's draft call, it seemed that Ballard didn't feel super alive and excited like they were about other players like Pittman and Taylor. It makes me wonder if maybe the player they really wanted got taken in front of them. George Pickens was taken, the pick right before they took Pierce. I wonder if Pickens was their guy. Then again, maybe this is just too much of a conspiracy theory on my end.
Yeah, Mike, I don't think George Pickens was on their radar.
I don't either.
There was some off-the-field stuff. Hell, there was some on-the-field, off-the-field stuff, if that makes sense. Flagged for unsportsmanlike stuff. They got ejected from a game, suspended at one point as well. So I think that contributed to Pickens and that aspect to it. Look, I'm not gonna go side by side with the videos of like their level of excitement versus the two. I think the generic excitement of Pittman and Taylor. First off, you're cooped up in your basement on Zoom. You're just naturally gonna like, all right, let's go, let's hoot and holler. I got my family in the background, let's all. I think it was the combination of getting both of them.
Yeah,
that's why you saw that excitement. And secondly, I mean, this will come out as like a slight to Alec Pierce, but he's not Michael Pittman or Jonathan Taylor.
Right.
Look at what Jonathan Taylor did in college. Hell, look what Michael Pittman did in college. I mean, some pretty darn impressive stuff. Like, Alec Pierce is a really, really nice prospect, but you also have got to develop him. I mean, 20 spots later than a guy like Pittman, for a reason. So, I'm not. Yeah, Mike, again, it's like, comparing your favorite children or whatnot. I don't want to overreact too much to that, but just a couple thoughts there.
Jason and Steven. Hey, Kevin. What are your thoughts on Alec Pierce? Feel like he is a big-bodied dude, but feel like Sky Moore might have been the better choice. Maybe answer this on this week's pod. Would you prefer Pierce or Moore?
Yeah, I was probably a little bit more, just because I think it's easier to get him the ball in multiple ways. Like, screens and jet sweeps, and I've always kind of made this reference to Paris Campbell, and certainly it hasn't worked out. But the goal with Campbell is this. You're giving him the ball in high percentage situations, which by that means if you target him on these short and intermediate routes, there's a good chance he catches it.
Mm-hmm.
Less chance for a turnover, less chance for an incompletion, things like that. And then you hope that the big play can be created post-catch with him doing that. Now, obviously, that hasn't happened, but that was, again, the thought process with Sky Moore. It's you get an in-rhythm thrower like Matt Ryan, there is the ability there for yard after catch and things like that. I like both guys. And I guess to go back to the earlier point, the PFF stat about Alec Pierce, 2/3 of his yards on vertical throws. Again, he's got to round out that route tree. You made the point about the private workout. Clearly, the Colts feel like that can happen. That's kind of some of my feelings on Sky Moore.
I agree with you there. Brent asks, do you think the drafting of Cross will impact the chances of Willis being re-signed? This has the same feeling of Okereke and Walker Jr. scenario. I want to be excited about the pick, but not at the expense of a Colt I really like.
Yeah, and again, Akari Willis and Julian Blackmon are two guys that the staff really likes. Easily the biggest losers of the draft, Akari Willis and or Julian Blackmon. And I go back to something I said earlier. Eddie, Willis is in a contract year.
Yep.
He hasn't missed a ton of games, but I think he's been banged up. I think he's played through a lot, and he has missed some games. Now, I look at Cross and think he's probably more of a free safety to me. Now, who knows? Maybe Gus Bradley's system, things can be viewed differently.
If I'm not mistaken, he likes to use 3 safeties, doesn't he sometimes?
At times, yeah. And again, that'll be something to keep an eye on here. Is just, does he do that here in his personnel grouping? Because again, I think when you go an extra defensive back, I kind of like Kenny Moore in the slot.
Yeah.
Do you go dime? That means you take Okereke or Leonard off the field. Obviously not Leonard, but you would take Bobby off the field in that situation there. So does this mean Kari Willis leaves? Julian Blackmon's a tremendous football player, but you can't run away from 2 serious injuries in 3 years. Really serious. So, basically, the moral of the story is this. The drafting of Nick Cross, to me, indicates that Khari Willis and or Julian Blackmon, both of them will not get a second contract here. One of them, but probably not both.
Right.
Think back to Malik Hooker, to Julian Blackmon. Think back to Anthony Walker, to Bobby Okereke. Hooker and Walker obviously did not get those second contracts here.
Walker is more deserving, though, than Hooker by far.
Now, granted, you had the 5th-year option with Hooker. That would have been kind of easy to pick up, and you didn't even do that.
Right.
You can find other examples. They're not all apples to apples, but Jonathan Taylor, Marlon Mack. This is just part of turning over a roster. But you don't trade up for Nick Cross if you don't believe that he is a really, really good player. Yeah.
I agree. Josh asks, what should be our expectations regarding Strawn moving forward? Patman firmly gets the nod over him on the depth chart all last year, and now probable pencil in Pierce over him as well. Just curious what happened between training camp last year and now where he seems largely forgotten.
Yeah, Josh, in camp, I thought it was just a lot of red zone stuff. It wasn't perfect. He had some drops. He definitely didn't look like a natural wideout in terms of in between the 20s and things like that. I don't know if I'd say Patman is firmly ahead of him. I'd have to look up Desmond Patman's playing time. Obviously, he played late in the year, but I don't think he played that much, to be honest with you. In terms of the slot, you had Doolin, Campbell, or I guess moving forward, Doolin, Campbell, DeMichael Harris. We'll see about T.Y. Hilton. I still get very mixed feelings on T.Y. Hilton. I'd probably bring him back, but we'll see how that plays out. I don't think Strawn is forgotten. I just think that it was weird that they played him week 1 and 2, and then they really dialed back. Maybe he had a bunch of mental errors in those first 2 games, and they're just like, all right, you can't help us out on special teams. We can't afford to have you out there. Maybe that was some of it. But, COVID took away his final year of college, so he'll get an opportunity. I mean, there is a level of just do you have too many big guys? You do want some different body types. I'm looking up here. Patman played 64 total offensive snaps last season. That is extremely low. I mean, 64 divided by 17 is what? 3 and change?
Yeah.
He played a very, very small amount.
Mehul asks, I think that's Mehul. I don't know how to.
Mehul, I believe.
Mehul, there we go.
DM me. I wanted to make sure that I got that right here. Mehul. Yep.
We got it right.
Yep.
Question for the pod in regards to Nick Cross pick. Do you think any of these 3 scenarios are realistic? Scenario 1, with his Julian Blackmon-like range and explosiveness, would Cross and a healthy Blackmon be the new starting safety tandem, with Khari Willis moving down into the nickel/slot and allowing Kenny Moore to play outside opposite of Gilmore, although I know how much we don't want to move Moore out of the slot. Option or scenario 2, given his length and speed, would they consider using Cross as an outside corner opposite of Gilmore? And the final scenario, could they possibly move Willis to Sam linebacker? Sorry for the lengthy question. Thank you for all the great work you guys do for the podcast.
Wow, that's a lot. Okay, let's say I do think Cross is more of a free safety, rangy type. I'm all about mix and matching packages, versus various teams week in and week out. Things change so much in the NFL about personnel and who you play with. I like Kenny in the slot. I do not see Nick Cross as an outside corner. I don't. Yeah. To me, this move is it's a lot more big picture long term here. We'll see. Maybe Gus Bradley views him as immediate role from day one, but this seems like a move of special team, potentially some sub packages as a rookie, but if everyone's healthy back there, this screams a lot more 2023 and beyond.
Yeah, I agree. Now, which of those scenarios, if you had to choose one, would be the most realistic? Because you kind of beat around the bush of which scenario you would pick there.
Probably one. Cross is an outside corner. No. Khari Willis is a Sam linebacker. Yeah, I guess you can move him into the box on some passing downs, but I'd probably say one with him and Blackmon being the new starting safety tandem. Again, I'm not necessarily saying that's going to be this year.
Right, me either.
Nick Cross was not taken until the 100th pick, 96th pick. Like, it's not like he was a top 10 pick. So, yeah, I would say that.
2 questions left. This one comes from Travis. No, plenty of storylines in coming days, but if Ballard gives you access like in years previous, would love to hear more about the trade-up. So aware of him to give up a future pick. Would love background on when the math makes worthwhile and how comes about.
Yeah, Travis, obviously we gave – it's a great question. We gave a little bit of a brief synopsis of it earlier about they thought he was a second-round pick next year. They felt like that was worth a third-round pick. That's a good amount to give up in my eyes. And, again, I know not everyone agrees with me on this, but I'm just such a big believer of – you keep as much ammo in place as possible to make that quarterback move. You know, if you think the Colts are winning 10 or 11 games next year, that means they're drafting in the 20s. You're moving up a whole lot if C.J. Stroud and Bryce Young, and Phil Dracovic, or whoever else you feel like will be drafted high next year. Now, you still have a first and a second, your own. You have a third that could turn into a second with the Carson Wentz trade. So you still have 3 picks in the first 3 rounds, maybe first 2 rounds.
Yeah.
So you are going to have nice capital, but I would have liked that other extra one. And I don't know, maybe I'm being too short-sighted with that view and whatnot. Maybe Nick Cross is going to be an incredible player that you would happily do this trade, time in, time out. I view it more of just quarterback means more. It's like the SEC, just means more down there. That's how I view QB.
For one thing that I kind of noticed over the recent years is like, okay, you go to, what was it, 2 years ago? You had Joe Burrow selected as the top quarterback.
Right.
Entering the year, he was not even considered in the top 3. And then you go in.
Very good point.
So, like, it seems like there's a trend over the past couple of seasons in college football is that there's not that top quarterback who's always seemed to getting the buzz, like C.J. Stroud and Bryce Love. There's usually always that 3rd or 4th guy that nobody's talking about that has a great year, and then all of a sudden he is vaulting and shooting up the draft boards.
You probably are going to have another name thrown into that mix as well. And who knows? I mean, last year Spencer Rattler was probably thought to be a top 5 pick, and now look at him. So you could probably go both ways with that.
Final question for the pod this week from Twitter, from Jordan. Do you think the Colts would have interest in bringing in Nick Foles as the backup quarterback?
Yeah, it's a great question. I threw out there earlier today on our show, better chance Nick Foles is on the roster week 1 or T.Y. Hilton?
Oh, man.
It's a tough one. I might say, I might say Foles right now. Again, I'm in the minority of this. I want my backup to have room to grow. That's how I view it. If you want your backup to win a game or two, Nick Foles is the guy. And some might argue and say, how much room does Sam Ehlinger have to grow? How much room does James Morgan? We'll see about him. Former, 5th-round pick, I think.
Is that the Florida international player from a few years ago that everyone was like?
Yeah, he's on the Colts roster.
Okay.
So, is I don't know, is he someone that has a strong camp, strong preseason, something about that? But the Colts, again, if Carson Wentz was a son to Frank Reich, the son that he never had, Nick Foles was the other son. Seriously, I think Reich wrote like the foreword in Nick Foles' book, maybe, or I don't know, something crazy like that. I mean, they are very, very close. So, I would understand the rationale for it. It would be a veteran, short-term, break case emergency. We need a guy for a couple games. Granted, Matt Ryan's been incredibly durable throughout his career, so
yeah, I
don't know if that would play into it as well. I would probably sit it out, but I understand the thinking behind it.
I wouldn't touch it. You also have to wonder about the money factor. How much would he want?
Yeah, I mean, you would hope he wouldn't want that much.
Right. But. The last thing from me, we talked about this last week on the pod about how, a Ben Banagoo type player could be.
We didn't see any of that.
It could be traded, for an extra pick, and I was shocked that there wasn't a Ben Banagoo or somebody else on the roster that was traded to get an additional pick.
2 things. I'm not sure if you get Ben Banagoo for Cool Ranch Doritos right now. That's my first thought. My second thought is Gus Bradley probably looks at film and thinks, all right, give me a chance. Give me a chance. We're going to do something a little bit differently on defense. If we can't get anything for him, let's put him through another training camp and a preseason and see if a scheme changes something there. I do think depth at edge. Depth at edge, depth of the interior offensive line, certainly tackle, corner, wide out. I mean, they signed 3 running backs. One of those running backs is going to make the team of the undrafted free agents. You got to think that. So we'll unpack all of that next week.
Hold on, something. Justin Ross just signed with the Chiefs.
Did see that. I just saw that. Yeah. Boy, if the medicals check out there.
Oh, no.
Just add one more to the old cupboard there for Mr. Mahomes and company. Eddie, thank you. Your draft workout
Anytime.
All weekend was outstanding. I know you had some long nights, so I appreciate you filling in here on the podcast the last couple of weeks. He's Eddie Garrison. Plug your Twitter, Eddie.
At Eddie Garrison _.
Boom. At Eddie Garrison _ on Twitter. I'm Kevin Bowen. Next week on the pod, some rookie playing time. We'll see if Luke Fickell will join, and we'll look at the undrafted free agent class. Everybody have a great week. If you missed it, all the written content up on 1075thefan.com.